Okay, so today I want to discuss this idea of framework, and this is an image. This is a way of seeing things that I want to explore and kind of create into a staple concept, something that we can continually reference and come back to. The idea is that this framework, you can almost think of it like a pair of glasses in some sense. It's a pair of but instead of glasses, made up of glass and lens and metal, it's made this framework which affects how we see the outside world. It's made up of someone's values. It's made up of their memories, their experience, and their value system, and that kind of controls and bends how they see the outside world. Now, I know it's kind of a broad definition, but I think it's better to come to an understanding that people, especially if they're from opposite sides of the world or in their political or cultural views, they see events differently. They physically see things differently. And it's not necessarily that one of them's hallucinating and the other one's not. It's more of because it's built in with this hierarchy of values. What someone values more, what they have in, as a preconceived notion, means they're going to see something, at the top. If we're looking at a hierarchy of this pyramid of hierarchy for what you see, you're going to see what's most important. Aha, this is what I thought. I was right. Bam, that's going to be the top. Versus somebody else who might have something else, they're going to put that at the top. And then when they both come together and talk about it, you have this idea that, bam, why can't you just understand this is the most important thing? They don't understand. They clash. And that's where, a lot of this tension and, the disagreement comes into play. Yeah, so it's the idea that our eyes are different from cameras. We don't simply take in a picture and recreate that. We add something. We add context, we add intention, history, morals, experience, and ourselves. Most importantly, we add ourselves. We add our own individuality to that picture. So, if you take a picture from the same spot with two different cameras, you'll get the same picture. But two people seeing an issue from the same spot, you can get something that's worlds apart. It's like these people, the two people are living in two different realities. It's necessary, and it's necessary to keep that in mind because, a lot of people can get really frustrated because, I can't understand why this idiot just can't see what's so painfully obvious. Because, what's so painfully obvious to you, why it's obvious is because of your value system, because of the framework, because of how you're physically seeing the world play out. And if somebody else has a different framework, they're seeing it differently. Think of it in terms of someone using a telescope versus a magnifying glass. You can think of this, the framework, it's, once again, think of it like a pair of glasses or something that's affected by memories and experience and values. They're seeing it play out differently. And, Jordan Peterson talked a bit about this, which is where I really started thinking about this idea, is because usually we think of, the world playing out as like a purely objective scene almost. This action from, A to Z, this complete action is perfectly objective. Somebody goes and witnesses that and they'll see that perfectly objective action. That's false. They're going to see what is happening based on their framework. They're going to see a murder. They're going to be like, I knew this means this, and this means I'm right about that, or this means I'm right about that. And versus this other person who watches it, they're looking at something completely different. They go, I'm right. This is where this is that, and this ties back to that. And the fact is, they could be right, but this is where you get in the system of value systems. What is more important? How does what plays into this scenario? What is actually the most important? And that's where, the argument should come down. And this is the way, framework. We look at it based on how the world plays around us. There's only one eye, the individual. The individuals look at it, how it plays out from there. So, think, for example, if somebody takes a group picture of you and a bunch of your friends, they pass the camera, and then they pass the camera around. What do you guys think? How do you look? What do you look at? You have this picture of you and your friends at a diner or something like that. Where do you look at? Where does your attention go? Your attention goes to your face first. How do I look? That's your first thought. You're looking at it. You got like 10 people in there. You zoom in on you and only you first. How do I look? Well, I look okay. Not too bad. Okay. And then you scan the rest of the people. Okay, she's looking all right. He's looking good. Okay. Da 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 da. That's funny. Da da. And then you go back to your picture, your face. And then you pass it on. And now what does the next person do? If they're in the picture, they do the exact same thing you do. They look at their own picture. They're scanning. How do I look? Okay. And, it might not even be like, they're super concerned with how they look. That's their value system. That's what it looks. How do I look in terms of this picture? And that's what comes into play first. And then, imagine if you had something, stuck in your teeth or anything like that, you would notice it if it was in yours first, because, this is the hierarchy of values. You're playing off which you value the most. And that's this idea of framework. And so that's the idea of framework, this system of your values, a system of memories, experience, and your own individuality, which makes up your framework, which, it's like a pair of glasses sitting on your head that's attached, directly back into your mind with, think of it, you had a USB port in the back of your head and directly into your brain. So where how everything you see immediately is filtered, it goes through this idea of framework. So you're not necessarily just seeing things objectively. There's an idea of, in America, we have this history of feuds happening once upon a time. So, if you could think about something like a feud, and a feud is basically two families who, they start off hating each other and it continues on for generations and generations. And so, how do these things start? Well, usually they start with this thing. So, the most famous one is between Hatfields and McCoy. So, let's make up a scenario for how this might happen. So, they're at a bar, they're drinking, Hatfield dude gets mad, and, they're all getting drunk, of course. So Hatfield dude one gets mad and punches McCoy dude one because he laughed at him. So, okay, and then they're fighting, and then McCoy dude two comes to back up his bro, because he's like, dude, we're family, we're going to help him out. And then Hatfield dude two joins up to back up his guy, because it was 2-on-1, and they get in a brawl, and this fight breaks out, and then suddenly McCoy guy shoots Hatfield dude 2, and and then they pull away and retreat. And so, Hatfield, how does each framework see this play out? Well, for McCoy, they're like, it was self-defense. For the Hatfields, they're like, dude, they shot Hatfield dude 2. He didn't even start the fight. He was an innocent bystander, basically. He was trying to do the right thing, and they killed him for it. Okay. So then what happens? Okay, Hatfield dudes 1-6, the rest of the family, -2, of course, because he's dead, go and shoot Hatfield dude 3, or McCoy dude 3. So McCoy dude 3 is dead in revenge for Hatfield dude 2. And so, oh my gosh, this is, so the feud just expands more. And so that's the way this plays out, is because each of these events is not just an isolated event. It is part of a chain of events. So, if any time someone does something, it's just like, and that's one more thing. So, this is the thing. So, if, say, this feud keeps going on, spiraling out down generations, what happens if a McCoy steals a horse from a Hatfield? Okay, he might not even know it was a Hatfield horse. He was just like, I just want that horse, so he steals it. Okay, what do the Hatfields think? Well, oh my gosh, the McCoys are stealing, and not only that, they stole Granny Hatfield's horse. She can't even walk. How low can these people get that they're stealing, our Granny Hatfield? This means, it's open season on all family. They're involving all family members in this feud. So, this theft, which should be, theoretically a simple theft. Somebody just stole something. It's actually part of this larger chain of events. So now it's part of this, it has this history, and that's how this is playing out for this, the feud. This is the perspective. So, yes, a horse was stolen, but that's not what it means to a Hatfield. They're seeing something much bigger at play. And so, that's the idea of framework. It can be a lens, it can be a telescope or magnifying glass, or simply a window, but all, this framework is deeply ingrained into an individual sense of value, experience, and knowledge. How does, this make me feel? I feel wrong. This is how it plays out. And this is how, people can really come to vastly different conclusions when seeing the exact same event. It's because they're adding moral judgments into, they're adding experience, all right? And this is how, it kind of comes to play out, especially when people are viewing, specifically one single event. You think of any big headline news event, and you can see immediately people start, going, this means this, and then the other guys mean this means that. That's what they're doing. They're using this framework, and they're saying, this is how it is, and this is the way that best reflects reality. So now we've identified this tool, this idea of a framework, and how it affects, this question is, how do we work with it? You recognize that this framework and value system affects how we see, and that means when we see a story play out, we see things very differently. For most fiction, it's pretty clear. They're presenting a framework of good and evil. Think of any Disney film. It's he's the bad guy. Evil, scary, sounds scary. he's probably the bad guy. You know, and when you see Scar, he's probably the bad guy and not, you know, the king. So, you know, it's this good guy, bad guy, you know, the hero looking heroic, being heroic, the royal princess being princessly, and then, you know, then you have the villain doing villainous things. That's, you know, the archetypal framework at play. And that's, you know, we like that because it's simple. It's a simple, easy understand framework, and we like seeing that play out. You know, that's why, you know, if you think of any Marvel movie, the framework is pretty simple. You know, you start off with good guy doing good things, good guy doing good things, bad guy does super evil thing, and then, you know, how does the good guy respond? It's this framework of good, evil, bam, bam. This character, this player, this is how you're supposed to view it. And the reason why a lot of people, you know, they do make main characters like that, you know, main characters like, you know, the hero and all this stuff, is because it's easy to understand, it's easy to get inside that framework. So when then, you know, they explore from there, they can go on. So, you know, it's this idea of, think of it like in Persuasion, I learned that they had this idea called pacing and leading. You know, it's this idea of, so, you know, the main character will have an idea, ba-dum, you know, this one idea, and you'll go, oh, that's a great idea. And then the main character will have another idea, ba-dum-dum, you know, oh, that's another great idea. Wow, this main character. And so you start building this relationship with the reader. The main character is starting to pull the reader in, and then the main character does, you know, the third action, ba-dum-dum-dum. The reader's more likely to trust it, especially now that he's been gone along with him for the two events. You know, if I was trying to convince you of something, I would say, and this happened. And you'd be like, yeah, that did happen. And I'd be like, and this happened. This also happened. And you'd be like, yeah, that also did happen. And then I'll say, and then that happened. And you'd be like, I don't know about that, but you were right about this and also this, so you must be right about that. You know, it's this idea of dun, dun, dun. You know, you're pulling them in. And so that's what it is when you're exploring the framework at play. You're pulling them in and trying to explore, you know, new ideas, if you're trying to introduce new ideas into a reader's framework, because they're having, you know, it's really hard and difficult to change someone's framework. That's the reason why, you know, you can see two people getting in an argument about a single event, and even if one person kind of wins about an argument, the other person is not convinced. You know, it's because that one event isn't just that one event. You know, it's tied back in 100 different ways back to this bigger picture. You know, you can think of it in terms of the top of a pyramid, right? So, you know, you got at the top of the pyramid, at the very top is where the event is that they're seeing. You know, think of a terrorist attack. We'll go for there. You know, big headline news, terrorist attack. So somebody's viewing that terrorist attack from this lens. That terrorist attack is the very tip of the pyramid. And then somebody else who has a very different conclusion, it's like another pyramid falling on top of that pyramid. So, you know, it's got that little tip. Both of the tips are just smashing against each other, and they're, you know, doing exploding, and everything's falling apart. But it's focused around that single event. And that's what, you know, it's important to see, it's important to recognize that these events are not necessarily isolated. You know, one terrorist attack isn't just a terrorist attack. What somebody's seeing is they're seeing a giant narrative. They're seeing a giant framework in terms of good and evil, and, you know, they're individual. They're seeing their own values. You know, think of it in terms of, you know, how does the group picture? Who do I look at first? I look at my own picture first. You know, how does this, you know, the history of this country, this history of the city for the past 10, 20, 15 years, you know, how does it work? What stands out the most? You know, it's this framework idea that what you value most is what you're going to physically see. So that's how somebody can look at a terrorist attack and go, this is the problem. This is the main problem. This is the systemic problem. And somebody else can go, how can you even think that? This is clearly the systemic problem. You know, they might both be right in a sense. They might both be wrong. One of them might be right over the other. You know, I'm not trying to sell any idea that everyone's right. You just need to understand everyone's idea. But it's more of focusing on the idea that, you know, a single event is not simply a single isolated event. There's more at play, and that's the reason why it can become so volatile and so, you know, divisive when talking about a single issue, is because it's not just a single issue. There's something more at play. And that's, you know, it's because they're seeing it through their framework. They're adding into this single event, this single terrorist attack. They're adding in their values, their history, their experience, their memories. And they're seeing this play out, and they're like, this connects to this, to this, this. You know, once again, it's the idea of the pyramid. the top of the pyramid is that single event, and the rest of the pyramid is their framework. This is what they're bringing along with it, which allows two people to see the same event and come to radically different viewpoints. So now let's think of a bit more of the more radical frameworks at play in the world. So you have two neighbors who dislike each other because they disagree over the property line, and they have this giant, 1 foot strip of grass that's 6 feet high, because none of them want, each one doesn't want to be the one to break and have to mow it, because he's right and it's the other guy's job to do it. So let's take a more more radical, extreme framework at play. So let's take communism in Russia. So the communists are viewing the world from a specific framework idea. They're seeing this play out in a very different way than non-communists. So communists in Russia, will take it in the time before the communist revolution of 1917. So we'll see how it plays out. How did they see the world that led them to make those decisions? Because what happened was they led a communist revolution which overthrew the government, and they set up a communist regime, and then gajillions of people died. How does that set about? What is the mental framework? What is the system of values that gets them to see the world play out this way? So pre-1917, before the revolution, Russia's ruled by the Tsar. It's a pretty totalitarian guy. I mean, he's a king. He can kill whoever he wants. He can kind of do whatever he wants, more or less. It's not quite like England or so. He's not like the 100% dictator. He still has to answer and play within the system, but at the same time, he can do a whole lot that most of us would be horrified at. So the Tsar, and the way the communists are viewing this is they're seeing, let's take for example, a child starves to death. He starves to death. He has nothing to eat. He dies. Bam. That's a single event. It's not isolated though. It plays into this greater worldview. So the communists are looking at this and they're saying the Tsar is the one who basically killed him, because the Tsar's system, this totalitarian government system, kept this child from getting food. Therefore, he was not able to eat. Therefore, he died. Therefore, it's the Tsar's rule who killed the child. And they're viewing this as part of this greater communist worldview. It's not an isolated event. So even if you were able to convince, this communist or the viewpoint that maybe it wasn't the Tsar's fault for this, it doesn't matter, because it's also his fault for, these 24 hundreds of thousands of other deaths. Once again, it's the framework, the pyramid. The framework pyramid is at play because the single event is at the top, and the rest of the communist ideology makes up more or less the rest of the pyramid, with of course the individual's perspective. And that's the reason why it's so hard to convince people or make them change their mind, because this one, especially when you're talking about one event, because they're not really talking about that one event. It's this idea that all roads lead to Rome, and all ideas lead to ideology. So what you have is these individual events fit within the idea, which leads back to ideology. So, that's the way this framework is playing out for this communist. He's looking at it and he's seeing the Tsar do this and that, and this is how they should respond. This is how the right thing to respond. So that's how this is playing out for them, and this is how the communists are viewing and seeing the world. So what they're allowing to do is, what their framework is doing is, it's dictating how they're seeing the world. This is what you're looking around, you're seeing the horrible conditions people are living in, and it's the Tsar's fault, and you want to do something, you want to change that. So you want to act, you want to do something to fix that. But this is also the interesting part, is because what this framework does is it determines what you see, but also it determines what you don't see. So you have this idea of the Tsar's rule, and he's evil. He's this evil monster. Look at him. People are starving. These people are dying. But what the communists couldn't see in 1917 was that the Tsar's rule did something good. It did something interesting, which they wouldn't have seen, they wouldn't have considered because of their communist viewpoint. What the Tsar's rule did by de facto, his rule, his existence, it kept out any worse ruler than the Tsar. So what happens? So you can think of power in a sense. In some senses, it's less like a mountain and more like a giant ravine. It's like a giant, sloping hill, because if you remove, whoever's at the bottom of the hill, something else is going to fall into place. Power is always going to be filled. That powerful role is always going to be filled. So you see, by the Tsar's existence, it kept out anyone worse than the Tsar. Now, he wasn't great, but he kept out something worse. So what the communist worldview was, they said, no, the Tsar is the worst. This is as worse as it's going to get, and it can get. And we're going to fix it. We're going to change it. So what do? They see this monster devouring the poor and the working class. That's part of, the heart of communist doctrine is stand up, workers of the world unite, all that. So the communists are seeing this, czarist monster devour the poor and the working class. And so what do? They kill the monster. But, once again, it's that ravine idea, what falls in its place. Instead, they get Stalin. They get a monster that devours everything. He's not just discriminating against, the poor and the working class this time. He's devouring everything. They get something, in fact, worse. In their communist viewpoint, they couldn't see it. They physically couldn't see. They couldn't, calculate or even try to account for the idea that there could be something worse than the Tsar, because their framework determined that the Tsar was the worst. The Tsar, the evil capitalist, greedy society is what's killing people. All we have to do is get rid of that, kill the monster, and, save Russia. But they did that. But the problem was they didn't see that there was another monster waiting. And once they, removed him, the other monster moved in and made everything worse than it was before under the Tsar. And that's the idea of framework playing out. So, it determines what you're seeing, what you value. You're looking at a photo of yourself in a diner with a bunch of friends. You see yourself first. So that's what you're seeing. But also, what you're not seeing is maybe someone on the edge or something. And this is the idea. This framework determines what you see and what you don't see. And that's how it plays out. You can think of it in another term, radical terrorists who hate America. When they see America, they're looking at them, they're looking at, this is what America did in this country, and it's horrible. And yeah, usually it is pretty horrible. But what they don't see is this is where America is involved, and this is the good America's doing, and this is where America didn't get involved, and look at all these people died. It's just like, sorry, America's not the only evil people out there, and sometimes they can do good, sometimes they can do bad. But for people who hate America, that event, that single point at the top of the pyramid, is going to be America doing evil. And so that means that everything else is going to kind of fall off to the side. So America doing anything good it's going to fall into the cracks, and it's not going to be as noticed, because their framework, their value system is playing out in a different way. And the way it's playing out is America is evil. And this is, the actions to prove it. The actions to prove otherwise are, they're not as important. So you can see again that once within these, kind of greater ideological frameworks, we're seeing a familiar scene, a familiar archetype kind of arise. It's this idea that America's good, or America's evil, everything they do is evil, and people who stand against them are good, or vice versa. America's always good, everyone who stands against them are always evil. It's this idea of, once again, good and evil. And this is the narrative framework that people often try and frame, especially when they're trying to convince others. And this can be applied on the grand scale of, like political leaders or political ideologies. Once again, communism is one of these greater ideological frameworks, and they're framing the world in a certain way. If you are a communist, you're a good guy. If you're a worker, blue collar, if you're lower class, you're one of the good guys. And if you're a capitalist, if you're a factory, and if you're bourgeoisie, you are one of the bad guys. It's this framework of good versus evil, and they're trying to, and they shift the framework, use it to try and convince people. It's like, do you want to be on the side of the good guys or the bad guys? And if you ask someone that, they'll be like, well, of course I want to be on the side of the good guys. And the communists say, well, okay, well, we're the good guys. And, the anti-communists are like, no, we're the good guys. And so you see it's this battle, this fight back and forth between frameworks. And this is something that political leaders, leaders in general, anyone trying to convince you of an idea or of an ideology is that no, we have it right. They're working on this framework. They're working on this basis of good and evil, and that's what they're trying to situate themselves and in relation to the world and in relation to everyone else. And this is an interesting thing, because these frameworks at play, it's interesting because there's almost like a continual feedback loop, or catch-22 in a sense, because it's the individuals that determine the framework, and the framework that determines how the individuals act, and how the individuals act determines the framework. So it's this interesting cycle, because what a communist, what he believes determines his communist framework, and that kept him from seeing some things, which means he continually acted as in this way. If he thought that all capitalists are evil, he would act in a certain way, and that's his communist viewpoint, and he would act evil, and that would keep him from seeing anyone who is a capitalist who is good, which means there's, not much of a chance that he's going to stop, believing that. He's just going to keep going and keep going. And so what this is I want you to think of these, political ideologies, political parties, ideologies, all these kind of things at play. These are, kind of the grander frameworks at work in society, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to situate themselves in a particular way and make you see the world from their view. They're trying to make you see who the bad guy is, match your idea of who the bad guy is, or get you to match theirs, And the same thing is with, think of communists. I mean, any ideologies, any political ideologies, the same thing with, here in America, we have, the Democrats and the Republicans. Each of them are selling you a particular story. Now, once again, I'm not making a commentary necessarily on who's right versus who's wrong. I'm just trying to say this is how the game is played. Truth or not, truth or fiction, this is how the game works. And then, this is the same thing as when people try and sell you on a framework. Usually that's why they try to make it as all-inclusive as possible. This is the reason why you might have noticed that facts don't really matter so much to politicians or leaders necessarily. What they're going after, however, is a narrative. It's like, well, it didn't exactly happen like this, but the sentiment was there. And it's like, well, okay, but that still makes you a liar. But, the idea is it still works for the politician, because this works. How you sell this story, it works. This is the reason why, Marvel, every time they can kind of give you the same story, the same superhero story over and over again, is because it works, because it sells, because it draws people in. And that's the kind of the trade-off they make. They make it widely acceptable, a widely acceptable hero and a widely accepted villain, and have them fight, and that's the story. And it's very widely accepted, and everyone can enjoy it and watch it, but at the same time it's extremely shallow, and you can pull it apart very easily. And but oftentimes that's what these ideologies and these frameworks are trying to do, is they're trying to work within so many groups of people, is because the people in them are trying to work them around to include as many people. If you're in one political party, you want as many people on your side, so you might stretch the barriers of your framework to kind of allow for that, which then determines how you're going to act. Once again, you get that loop going on again. And so this is the framework. This is how, people are using this narrative framework in mind to try and shape society, shape individuals, and to try to change people to come to their ideas. And so all roads lead to Rome, and all ideas lead to ideology. And that's when you start to realize that within these ideas of, frameworks and narratives, the one that wins isn't the one that's most true or the truest always. Oftentimes it's the one that sells the best stories. So every time you see someone within the mainstream, and I'm not necessarily talking about the classic, what people usually mean by mainstream, but anyone with a substantial amount of followers who is pushing an ideology or a worldview, they're going to be using this idea of framework. The same way Marvel is using this idea of framework to sell you on a story, because they're trying to get your attention. They're trying to get your movie ticket. They're trying to get you to invest emotionally in their story and in their characters. These leaders are trying to do the same thing. They want you to invest your time, your money, and your attention into their ideas. And sometimes, very often it's for good causes. I don't want to make it sound like these people are all trying to puppet string, the rest of society. Some people definitely are, but most of them aren't. But it's the idea that these stories and the way stories work within society are so prevalent that most times they go unnoticed in how they're used. Sometimes it's not even nefarious. It's just, that's just how they see the world. Everyone has a framework, and it's your job to figure out what yours is and how you plan to operate in the world, and how you're going to try and balance this idea that people are trying to constantly vie for your attention and for your time and your energy and resources, because they're trying to win you over one way or another.